So like I said, I was very late getting into the generational planets, and when I finally did, I was so excited to be there and, wished I had explored them sooner. Um, each of these, while they are generational, so you're sharing them with your peers, I've kind of positioned them each as a path in your life. So, like every single piece of our natal chart is representing a different side of who we are and a different piece of what we came here to do. And Uranus is the path to individuality. So, the little thing that I put on there, when someone tells me to do something I was already planning on doing, well, now I'm not doing it. So that to me sums up the idea, the vibe of Uranus, is that it's almost rebelling just for the sake of rebelling, but we're going to get into all of that in much more detail. The path to individuality. So when we think about Uranus, we're talking about self versus society, and your true individual, authentic core self, like who your soul came here to be, versus all of the training and conditioning that you've received since getting here. So basically, from the time we're born, we're conditioned by our parents, by our communities, schools, churches, grandparents, friends. The training and conditioning that we receive, it continues our entire life, or at least attempts to train and condition us. And underneath all the conditioning is our real self. So the first step to working with your Uranus energy is to realize that there are actually two different layers to who you are and the way you experience yourself. One of those layers, and probably the one maybe you're more familiar with, depending on how much inner work you've done, is the training and conditioning piece, like who I'm supposed to be. Like I'm female in today's day and age, so I should get married and have some babies. Like that kind of understanding of like who you should be versus your real self that exists as a function of like you internally deciding how to express your individuality. Do you want to get married? Do you want to have babies? No, I don't. So I'm not going to, even though society, culture, any of those things might feel like they're putting that pressure on me. That pressure, that conditioning is an illusion that we can drop and follow our authentic selves at any time. So Uranus is helping us to seek a deeper truth of who we really are. That is why it is the path to individuality. So just some very basic kind of fun facts about Uranus. It's a generational planet. It happens to be the ruling planet of Aquarius, and Aquarius is also the ruler of the 11th house. Uranus spends about 7 years per sign, and think of that as like that's just enough time to really disrupt the status quo in whatever area of your life, whatever area of the chart it happens to be transiting for you. Those transits, like per house, last about 7 years. And there's a lot of work and evolution that can happen on ourselves in 7 years. So when you track Uranus transiting around your chart, you're looking at the cycles of personal evolution that your soul is undertaking. It goes retrograde about once per year, 5 months at a time. So that means that basically a little less than half of us have Uranus retrograde in our chart. And Uranus retrograde is a time where we get especially serious about evaluating the systems and structures that we are, like the rules that we're playing by. And we evaluate, is this really me? Or is this my conditioning? That Uranus retrograde 5 months is a time where that bubbles to the surface. So if you're born with Uranus retrograde, that's just kind of a constant state of being where you're here to reevaluate what you're doing and whose rules you're actually living by. The Uranus return happens every 84 years. So some people live to see that. Not many people live for two, if anyone. And most of us, though, experience our Uranus opposition, which happens around our early 40s, age 42, thereabouts. And that one is an actual turning point, usually in our early 40s. And you think about like the midlife crisis, it begins in our early 40s with our Uranus opposition, and it ends in our late 40s with our Chiron return, which we're going to get into at the end here. So that Uranus opposition that happens in our early 40s, that means that Uranus has moved halfway around the wheel from where you were born. It hasn't moved the other half yet. But during that time of that opposition, the pressure is on to release anything that is standing in the way of you being your true self. So a lot of people get divorced at that time. A lot of people change jobs or careers because they realize that, maybe I chose my job to satisfy my father, but that was 20 years ago and he's gone. And what am I really doing this for? Those are the kinds of things that drastic changes can happen really quickly when we go through that Uranus opposition, even though it lasts a couple years in terms of how long that takes to play out. So Uranus is said to be the higher octave of Mercury. So Mercury being the fastest moving planet, very associated with our intellect and our logic. And so Uranus, like Mercury, is a lot about observing the world around you. But Uranus has an intuitive knowing that fills in the gaps, that apparently is like just that much of a higher frequency of Mercury's ability to observe and be able to gather details and information. Uranus's mission, if it had to like boil it down, is disrupting and transforming the status quo. And Uranus is allowed to do that because if you skip down a few, I should have put this one next, but Uranus is very altruistic. It has humanitarian motivations. So Uranus represents our collective, and on a soul level, when we think about who we really are as individuals, our souls are all connected. I mean, our collective consciousness is really just one, and one with source or the universe, non-physical, whatever you want to call it. And so when we sink down to our most individual self, really there's a caring for not only ourselves, but for everyone. And so when you think about disrupting or transforming the status quo, depending on how much you like change, that can sound really scary, but always, always the underlying motivation is to make the world a better place for the collective. So there are lots of things that can change and systems that can be torn down to the ground and like, let's just start from a clean slate. And if that happens, like in the Uranus return, for example, if you do find your marriage falling apart or your career is not satisfying or whatever, and you feel a change on the horizon, those changes are always improving the status quo. It's not just change for change's sake. It's always going to be an upgrade where average consciousness is concerned. So there's a lot of like almost Robin Hood mindset, like taking from the people who are abusing the system and reaping those rewards and rebalancing so that everyone has a better quality of life. Everyone has a more fair shot at living a happy life here on this planet. Because it represents our rebellion, the first start or the first step to rebellion is to be conditioned, is to have something to rebel against. So when you look at your Uranus placement, it's also where you're likely to be conditioned, like where that rebellion is going to play itself out. So for example, mine is Uranus in Sagittarius in the 9th house. And Sagittarius in the 9th house is like worldwide travel and expansive thinking and like forming your own version of the truth, whatever that looks like for you. And when you have Uranus in those places, they're like, probably you didn't start venturing out until way later in life. You probably started your journey very sheltered, very like closed in to a certain little world. And it was very scary to step out and challenge this little world and create a bigger one. But that is the journey of Uranus. That's the breaking free of where you started and moving towards a place that better represents your authentic self. Uranus goes beyond what is known. So it's fearless in the face of Well, we've never done that before. Uranus doesn't care. Uranus wants individual expression. And the whole point of the individual is that that's where we mutate as a species, like the mutations that make us better and better and better and better at survival and more efficient and whatever, those mutations, they happen inside an individual, and from the individual they get passed out into the collective. So to step into the unknown, that's where improvement lives. So Uranus is fearless. Like, it challenges any limitations that we're holding, any fears that are holding ourselves back. It's definitely it can be a scary one as it moves through different places in your chart. Its goal is to shatter the system. So again, here it's a way to kind of like release the fear around the concept of change, is that the system wouldn't be shattered if it was working. And if it's not working, it will be shattered. So, like, we can look around at things that are being disrupted and things that aren't working and that are falling apart and whatever. And we can trust that, you know, Uranus's energy wouldn't be dismantling those things if they were serving their purpose in the best possible way that they could. So again, all of that changes for the better. It really does represent our personal freedom and ways that our personal freedom may be challenged. And then in general is just a nonconformist. So going back to the little penguin, like, the fact that you're telling me I have to means it's like technically no longer an expression of my individual self. And therefore Uranus disagrees with it instantly, because Uranus wants the most unique version of who you are to come forward and be seen. So each of these planets, I'm going to wrap up with healing around this energy, because every single one of them is representing a transformation, a different facet of who we came here to be, and what that healing is going to look like. Because when you work within each energy, they're all going to feel a little bit different. So Uranus, the grounds for that healing will be you acting out your own personal rebellion. So whatever that looks like for you, and again, you're going to have to look at the house and the sign and the aspects that Uranus is making. But that's scary, especially if you were born in the 40 years, which is like 1950 to 1990, thereabouts, where Uranus was opposite Chiron, where our individuality is opposing our deepest wound, where it no longer feels safe or good to think about expressing your individual self. So really shining that individuality out loud, it can be varying degrees of challenging depending on what else is going on in your chart. But that's the task, is to shine your individuality out loud, which means you will get unstuck. The things that are keeping you stuck, they will have to be eliminated in order for you to move forward and shine your individuality out loud. Doing that, expressing your authentic self, it naturally challenges the limitations that you're placing on yourself, and it lights up the conditioning that you're living by that's contradicting your authentic self. Uranus healing happens like a lightning bolt. So whenever you think about Uranus energy, it can be changes that happen in a blink of an eye, and that they change your whole life in the blink of an eye. Harsh liberations. So going back to Uranus doesn't dismantle things that are working. Uranus is only dismantling the things that aren't working. So if you're clinging, which read what I mean when I say clinging unnecessarily to something that's not working for you, sometimes the liberation from that thing can be harsh and painful and leave you feeling like you've really lost something and you're the victim of something awful. For example, your spouse cheats on you and you find out about it, and that leads to the end of the marriage. I'm thinking of a story of some people that I know where she was putting up with way more than she ever should have been, letting all these things slide and not calling her spouse out on it. And eventually he cheated, and lied about it for a long time. And eventually she caught him with proof. And that is how their marriage eventually ended. She could have walked away years before that ever happened, and she wouldn't have gone through any of that. But she was living out her obligation. She had made a promise. They had kids together. She had a whole list of reasons why she couldn't leave this relationship that's not working. And in the end, the relationship fell apart anyway because it wasn't working. So it's like if you liberate yourself when in the early subtle signs that something's not working for you, you liberate yourself and walk away from that and towards something that is more authentically suited for who you are. There is no harsh liberation. But if you have experienced a harsh liberation, that's signs that we're clinging to things that aren't meant for us. To heal this energy means breaking free of expectations, which that's a deep one, because that can be the expectations of our parents. It can be the expectations of society or our community or even ourselves, like that's probably the hardest one, because we can hold our expectations of ourselves really close to our core and sometimes even in our subconscious. And those expectations or those conditionings that we're living by, when they contradict our authentic self, we have to break free of those expectations. So there's a lot of shadow work that goes into living your most authentic self. Self-empowerment for humanity's sake. So that's like I want freedom for myself, first and foremost, no doubt about it. I want to experience radical personal freedom. But I think that also goes back to my Uranus and Sagittarius, but I don't just want it for me. I want it because I want to be an example that we can all live like this. This is a place that every single human being can get to, because I walked here and I can point back to the path of, I didn't start here, but I worked my way over here. We're each an example. And when you think about living your most authentic self, you're not only benefiting for you, you're also shining a light of an example out into the world for anybody else who might be in that vicinity trying to work towards something similar. Depending on how thick your conditioning is, it can look like a complete reinvention of who you are. Like people saying, I don't recognize you anymore. I don't, like, your energy feels so different. What are you doing? What's going on? And the answer is, this is me. I wasn't being myself before. I was living according to who I thought I should be. And now this is the real me. So that transformation can look very drastic, especially from the outside, people who don't understand what you're doing, trying to get more in alignment with your authentic self. Again, in order to heal that Uranus, because it's so tuned in to the collective consciousness, in order to really get to that vibration, you have to remove the illusion that any of us are separate from each other. Like my soul is, sure, it belongs to my being, but at the same time, my soul is connected to your soul and every other soul, and all of us are connected through the universal energy. It's all together. So any benefit that I do for myself, any kindness that I show to myself, or care that I take of myself, or freedom that I allow for myself, any good that you do for you benefits collective consciousness. So when you realize that, like, your being, your life is sending ripple effects through the universe, whether you are living a aligned, happy, positive, joyful life, or you beat up on yourself and you hold yourself back and you're afraid to go for your dreams or whatever, no matter what you're doing, you're sending ripple effects through the universe and it's affecting everyone. So Uranus healing is about recognizing, are you contributing something nice to the collective, or are you polluting? And I polluted for a long time before I knew better. And now this is one of those ways where it helps me to face my fears that hold me back from being my authentic self, by knowing that me doing it is going to show somebody else that they can do it. Just like I've watched teachers ahead of me who they follow their authentic self. They use their voice to talk about what they're passionate about, and watching them do it has given me the courage. So following your authenticity, it's like paying it forward to the people who will come behind you in your footsteps. So that's all I have on Uranus. Are there any questions there before we move into the next planet? And we'll save specific placements for the end so we can see how much time we have to play with.
I'm wondering, for the older people who are really eccentric, is that just their personal traits, or is that like a Uranus transit?
I think, I've heard my girlfriend mostly, who's 48, or almost 48, she says like, she just naturally, it's easier to be herself as she's gotten older. But I do think Uranus making its way through your houses and eventually like your Uranus opposition, those are like cleansing to the conditioning. Like every time Uranus completes moving through one of your houses, it's like it's taken off a layer of the film that's standing in the way of you being who you are. So by the time Uranus has transited half your chart, you have a lot easier time pursuing your authentic self. Probably, I'm 33, so I don't know. I'm hoping that it just gets easier and easier, but I do think that that has something to do with it. And then there's the people who, like maybe their Aquarius risings, where Uranus would rule their chart, or their Uranus is conjunct the sun, or like some other prominent placement of Uranus in their chart, that maybe they just are like Teflon for conditioning. Because some people are like that, where very early on, they are pursuing who they are as an individual. They're outside the collective and they don't care. So some people are just born like that. Some people, I got to think a lot of us that are in that 1950 to 1990 window where we have Uranus opposite Chiron, I got to think like you pretty much have to get pretty far along before you're going to have the courage to really step outside the lines and demonstrate something different, something new that society's never seen before. Because you think about like, I mean, the mob is scary. The mob mentality is scary. Where like back in the day, they burned witches at the stake. The mob has done many scary things. And to be different in this world is an act of courage all by itself. So whether you're being different inside your home, in the privacy of your own home, or you're stepping out into the world and demonstrating your difference, I think there's an evolution that happens step by step by step as Uranus makes its way through each of your houses. Like right now, Uranus is in Taurus, and it's still going to be there for another, I don't even know, 3, 4, 5 years. So wherever that is in your birth chart, like for me, it's transiting my first house, and I can feel it these last couple years, like taking the film off of like who I thought I should be, and me leaning more towards like an individual authentic expression of who I am. And that's not even to the Uranus opposition yet. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before I think Neptune's next?
I guess I have one.
Yeah.
So in my birth chart, I have Uranus conjunct Pluto, which directly opposes my Chiron and my moon and Saturn, all three. How does that interaction like with Pluto? Because Pluto also blows things up. So how do you think that interaction will work together?
Let's start there when we get to the end and we start talking about specific placements, because I'm going to go through Pluto. So we'll lay a really good foundation for that. And then, yes, let's start there when we get to placements, and we'll talk about that conjunction, because in short, that's a very powerful transformation is how I would interpret it. Yeah. And the act of rebellion is probably going to be that much scarier. The conditioning is probably extra thick, I would think. Like the rebellion, the strength of the rebellion kind of matches the layer of conditioning that you're having to sort your way through. So yeah, we'll get more into that because I don't remember that from your chart. And I know I've looked at it so many times. It's these generational planets, they're coming online for me, and it's fun to get to share them.